Hey, John Gilroy here. Today, we're going hardcore. That's to say, OPM's core human capital management platform. Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. My name is John Gilroy, and I'll be your moderator in the virtual studio. Today is world-famous Charles Fiery, Director Market Solutions Architect at Excella, E-X-C-E-L-L-A. Well, Charles, I'm going to set up the discussion, and you can run with it for the next 2 hours or something, you know. The federal government, 2 million employees, 100 HR systems. What could possibly go wrong, huh?
Oh, yeah. Should be a cakewalk.
Yeah, this is the issue. And Charles is foolish enough to dive into this problem and try to come up with some solutions. I don't know if you can be heading for the hills after this adventure or not. So tell us the problem situation and how Excel's helping resolve some of these issues.
Sure. So right now, I mean, you have over 100 federal agencies across the government, all working on disparate systems. You know, there's some overlap, of course, but you have over 100 HR systems and then hundreds of agencies, or over 100 agencies, with no single system of record. And so the idea with this consolidation towards a single HR platform is to deduplicate some of that and centralize it so that you can benefit, I think, from that economy of scale. And this is sort of inconceivable, right, to have so many different systems, especially in such a large organization. So agencies have been stuck maintaining their legacy stacks or their legacy HR stacks and platforms for years. And so actually modernizing and getting some traction and some agreement across so that there can be some shared resources has been difficult. And so this mandate sort of forces that issue. And it's a mandate, it's a deadline, and not just a suggestion. So
this is a memo from OMB coming, I think, December 2025, with the deadline of, guess what, 2028. That's 2028 down the corner. Yeah, it's going there too.
And it's moved a few times. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up moving out again. But there's a pretty aggressive timeline set for it, and then also some initial agencies too that are set to.
It's almost like business management 101. So if Charles Software buys out Gilroy Software, we'll probably be incorporated in the same HR, I would think. I mean, this is just a business decision, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Good. Okay, you mentioned legacy stacks. What I can see human beings doing is, so John Gilroy shows up for work at an agency. Well, we got to maintain this we got to make sure it's working. You're going to make sure it's working. And then it's 3 years later, make sure it's working. And then all of a sudden, Charles says, well, what about modernization? So it's just a human problem more than anything. It's that people want to have their existing equipment work so no one yells at them. And all of a sudden, modernization kind of takes them away from the maintenance, huh?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's tough is if you hear this is going to be a platform modernization and there's some sort of technical, central underpinning to it. And that's true. But at the same time, the biggest challenge in something like this is going to be the process discovery and the change management that each of those agencies needs to engage in to figure out what it is that they need to do. So no agency just runs on one HR system now. There are 30-something disconnected systems probably across a lot of them. They have the primary functions, which core HR is going to take into account and take care of. But then there are also ancillary functions, things like payroll, benefits, and retirement. Some of those things are going to have to stay at the individual agency level, and they're going to have to integrate to that new core function. So figuring out all of those workflows now. And then by workflow, I mean, it could be somebody writing something down on a piece of paper and copying it into an Excel sheet and then taking that on a flash drive to another computer. Those things are totally possible. And what needs to happen is those undocumented workarounds need to all be surfaced. And then once you have all of that, you can start thinking about the actual change that needs to go into it to accommodate this mandated change.
Mm-hmm. Charles, I bought some tickets for Oklahoma in June. And I'm sure if I walked into a 7-Eleven in Oklahoma, I'd say, well, how's the federal government work? Well, you work for the government, and then they spit out your retirement and your benefits, and it's smooth as silk, and it's just one big monolith inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. But boy, it's like the more you think about it, it's so diverse and so many silos. And I do interviews with people who talk about APIs, and they say, well, Charles, the first thing you have to do is you have to discover where your APIs are But now you're telling me is that no, we have to discover where all the tentacles reach for these systems. I mean, it's a discovery 101, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, some of those are going to be better documented than others too, and some of them are just going to be, knowledge that's siloed off. And so, in order to make this an overarching thing at both the agency level, but then the integration further up into the new core platform, that's all going to have to be made visible,
Yeah, yeah.
agency wide.
Charles, you're a young man. I'm an old man. Back in the day, there was something called SneakerNet,
Yeah.
where you take a floppy drive and walk down and give it to Charles. Okay. And then you just mentioned about a thumb drive doing that, and so what some people are doing is you can call it shadow IT. Some people call it today shadow AI. But maybe we're talking about shadow HR, where they're taking all the employees in Kansas, putting a thumb drive and walking down the hall and handing someone. Now, these aren't documented. Everyone knows that that's how you get it to Charles. So how do you even document something like that?
Right. I mean, I think that probably requires like a fair amount of like involvement as it moves down the chain. So this needs to be communicated very clearly why it needs to be done. Down to like where you're collecting all of this information and like what it's for. So that's like kind of a change management element of it. But to that point, right? Like a lot of the federal government isn't working at a desk too. And that's one of the things. They're not just sitting at a desk. There's firefighters, there's folks working in warehouses or moving around other places that aren't really in front of a computer and might not even have one. So a lot of those processes, there are going to be a fair number of those things that occur that are either paper-based or some other sneaker net type thing that have to be taken into account.
I think what the skill set here is perhaps you got a degree in software development or systems engineering or something, but this is human engineering. This is walking into an agency and sitting down with people and saying, maybe it's with a whiteboard and humans. I mean, that is old fashioned, isn't it? But it's okay. How does this take place? And you have to identify some basic concepts. I think there's sensitive issues that have to be identified very carefully in federal, like personal information, huh?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's one of the things, right? This is like kind of a whiteboarding. It's kind of a back to basics. Let's see what it all is. I mean, there's going to be things that move beyond the whiteboard ultimately, and we're going to ingest this into a big, glorious new platform. But even before we figure out what that platform is and exactly how that's going to go and exactly when like your agency is going to do it, like starting to have, mapping out your systems, how your ancillary systems currently connect to your core functions. We know what the core functions are going to be. That's going to be something that you can get ahead of. You don't need to wait for the vendor to be announced or the platform provider to be announced from OPM. You can do all that stuff now.
I spent many years in the classroom, and I used to talk about the dreaded word homework. And now it looks like the leaders in these organizations are saying, "Hey, Charles, when you're home tonight, you got to find out exactly, what happened to this shadow system that was designed 5 years ago, and the person left." This is like Sherlock Holmes or something. I mean, and so you have to identify the systems itself and then make some kind of a plan for change management, which is another human skill.
Yeah. There could be like an AI play here too, in the sense where like one could take in all of this various information in different forms, right? And then look for patterns and look for elements. So there's probably a way to help organize it. But yeah, I mean, I think to your point initially, a lot of it's just doing the homework and figuring
New
it out.
system, old system.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm a history buff, and I've looked at maps of ancient Rome and then the roads and network system and everything else, and very detailed. Kind of looks like a tree in some ways, and so maybe networks today can be outlined that way. Systems architects have done it for decades, and so that doesn't necessarily mean that because something connects one way today, that doesn't mean it'll connect a new way in the new platform, huh? So there's changes have to take place in the structure itself.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so what can a leader do now to set the ground for this transition? Maybe before they even pick a vendor, where should they start?
I think it's going to be probably mapping out all of those systems, thinking about if you have a roadmap in place already, what what's essential. What are things that you're concerned about losing in this transition, for instance? If you have a highly modified core set of functions that, maybe do certain things that are agency specific to you. We're going to figure out how you're going to extract some of that functionality, where it's going to go. Um, some of those things we don't have answers necessarily for yet, but becoming aware of what it is, like all of the rules, all of the quirks that you might have. And so I think that it again comes out to kind of like surfacing everything, and figuring out like not only where your data is, but the state that it's in, if it needs to be, if it's going through some sort of transformation, like a medallion transformation already, or if it's going to need to in order to get into the appropriate format going forward. That's something to think about. Another thing to look at would be, well, I would say like compliance with record submittal at this point. So like when records get submitted, it's possible to submit things to OPM, for instance, personnel records that like do not necessarily conform. This is a little bit geeky here, but like do not necessarily conform to the requirement, like the data format, that it should be in, and it'll still pass and it'll be accepted, but like some of the elements, some of the data fields won't be correct. Going ahead and getting ahead of some of those now and thinking about like, well, why isn't that? Do I need to update the format? Does the data need to be more consistent or cleaned, or go through some sort of transformation? Starting to do that now is probably a good idea, as it's probably going to pay off in the future when the new system requires compliance. And I don't have it in front of me right now, but I think there's also a particular percentage. It's a relatively high one. Data submitted via the new platform also needs to be compliant. So it can't, pay 75% pass. It's something greater than 95. If I
Oh, that's
recall
it.
correctly.
Tomorrow, I'm going downtown to a satellite show in Washington, D.C. I'm going to interview several companies. One talks about managing debris in space,
Oh,
and it's going to focus on the data. Hey, format's fine, but if bad data is formatted correctly, you're going to have bad results. And
yes.
so this has got to be important. So each agency is out there. I mean, we talk about all these different. Each one's going to have different data sets and good and bad. And so, I mean, so first of all, I have to worry about the format, but then the actual data that's in it. I mean, there's going to be little quirks with every agency. I mean, everybody's got a different way to do things, and some agencies they're moving. Look, they're people on trucks. FEMA's got trailers moving
Yeah.
everywhere. So how do you account for something like that? I mean, there's going to be each HR system got a different flavor to it.
Yeah, and like as it stands right now, so the CPDF, like the Central Personnel Data File, that's the OPM standardized format for federal
Mm-hmm.
personnel records. So every agency submits workforce data to OPM in this format, and there are about 1,200 validation rules that govern it. And that's what I was talking about before. So that's like basically the backbone of how the government tracks its whole workforce. And some of those rules apply to different folks than others, depending on the role. Kind of like your point, like lots of different things. We're covering a whole lot of different job profiles and career roles compared to like lots of companies, right? That are substantially sizable. So that's yeah. I think coming back to those things and figuring out where you're hitting, where you're missing, and
Yeah.
yeah, what needs to be transformed and what needs to go.
Charles, the cybersecurity folks talk about false positives and false negatives and going down the wrong rabbit hole here. I'm guessing there's some kind of you may look at a legacy system and it may look like there's something wrong, but actually it's fine just because of a unique way of classifying it. So
Yeah.
this is almost another skill you have to have, discerning between error messages and validity, huh?
Yeah, so like you could have data errors that are real, that are just masquerading as some sort of like a system artifact. A
Hmm.
legacy system might flag something that's actually like you could have like a new field requirement, for instance, come out that like your legacy system hasn't been like the test case basically hasn't been updated for. So it may flag as like this is an incorrect field, where in reality that's the field you're required to submit at this point. So that is part of it. It's understanding like where your system is at, where it's expected to go, and then figuring out, kind of the difference between those things. So you need to like, it's basically revalidation. I think it's like
Mm-hmm.
validating, like,
That makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of the issues. Um, you don't want to just start fixing things in your legacy setup without being like, well, wait, is there a reason we've done it this way? And that kind of speaks back to the shadow IT, right? Because we may have been doing something for the last 2 years that like might flag but that's because somebody made the change but didn't make the corresponding, check or the test change. And
Yeah.
it works. But the
Yeah.
person who knows that maybe is gone or they aren't available the day that someone comes in to audit it. And anyway,
Yeah.
it's kind of like all contributors, all stakeholders, leading in, I think, having a share and a contribution probably to the surfacing, the discovery and the change management aspect.
Charles, like I mentioned, I spent some time in the classroom, and students would turn in work, and I would want to have some more specificity. I'd say, in order to be terrific, you got to be specific. Now, the bad news is that can get tedious. However, when it comes to data formatting, all of a sudden being specific can have big monster payoffs down the road, can't it? I mean, so this thorough coding is important, but there's a reason for this madness, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, like you can just kind of work from the basics on it. I think the easiest thing would be just to start at the CPDF record. Are they clean? Are the actions mapping correctly? You can get that data upon submittal. I think you can get a receipt back as a report. So that's probably a good thing to start, and then investigate those investigate those specifics and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
see where they go.
So we'll dive into data. We know some best practices here, but sometimes in situations there's outside of data, how can agencies prepare? And I'm thinking about baseball. And baseball's got a lot of unwritten rules. Well, everyone knows that this is what you do. Well, why is that? Because that's what it's not in the rule book, but that's kind of people accept certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine that when you look at upgrading a system or updating a system, there are workarounds or handoffs or stuff that's, like you said, the person who started it may not be there any longer. And so is that one place to start as well?
I think so. I mean, like that's the sort of thing you'd want, right? So you want to know how things actually work, but you want the workarounds, the handoffs, the stuff nobody writes down. It's not just that org chart version, but it's I think probably aligned to it to some extent. So I mean, that's probably the biggest lift a lot of agencies are going to face.
So, Charles, with the legacy system, John Gilroy shows up for work at an agency at 9 a.m. and, well, we've always done it this way, and A goes to B, and then it goes to the next system. And when a transition takes place, some capabilities may get lost or they may be temporarily delayed. So this has to be conveyed to the transition team as well, shouldn't it?
I would think so, yeah. And part of that is identifying, what's essential. We do this all the time with lots of systems. You end up in a place that has, say, 40 or 50 disparate systems. And it's well, this is essential. This is essential because we've always had it. So part of that is being well, what do we think is essential? And then actually looking at usage and relevance. And a lot of it is, I'd say, usage patterns. Because a lot of times you'll find that, well, maybe two people have used that in the last 2 years. And by used it, I mean they logged in to look for something that was a document from 3 years prior. And it could have just been stored as an artifact. We don't need to keep running the whole system. So I would say you're discovering, identifying what's essential, what's agency specific, but then really thinking about that and thinking about well, this is a good chance to either say well, is it really, really essential? Or could it be done in a different way? Are we just doing it this way because we've historically done it? And then making a plan for how that works. And of course, the whole thing is communicating with all of those involved. So I think you want stakeholder buy-in across, and you certainly want awareness. And then you make the plan and figure out how to make it happen. Obviously, all of these things have to keep working, and I know they will in some way or another, but it can either be chaotic or it can be, at a cadence. And I think what we want to go for is a cadence.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. We started off talking about 100 different agencies. I thought of something here in my neighborhood here. I'm about to put in a new driveway. I can just get out the computer and spend 3 hours in research and find a company all myself, or I can walk across the street to Joe, who's an architect, and go, well, who did you use? ABC. Okay, well, I mean, how did you do it? Well, we had to do it. And how long did it take? And all of a sudden, I could spend 5 hours researching, and Joe would know in 3 seconds. And so I think if you're agency A and you realize that there's dozens of other organizations that are making it, why not knock on someone's door and go, well, hey, maybe you could help me out with this. And how did you guys do it? And what did you find? So this is a kind of it may be strange in some organizations, but I think it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
I think so. And I think community is super valuable and important, whether it's the neighborhood or, your federal agency next door, right? And like, even though every agency has its own mission and like business problems that it's going to deal with or business requirements, the nature of the change is going to be consistent. It's not like there's going to be some technical magic bullet that's going to help one agency versus another. They're all going to have the same types of like discovery, prioritization, and preparation things, even if like the specifics of one agency are different than the other, and the workforce is different. The same things have to occur. So I think there's a huge value in sharing experiences and finding out what works. By the time this is done, and like I think it's mentioned too, it's mentioned in the memo. There's going to be waves 1 and waves 2. The wave 2 agencies are going to be able to learn a lot from the ones that went first, and that's going to continue until the end when it's all buttoned up, of course,
Yeah.
and it'll be that cakewalk we talked about.
When I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile, you're listed as an architect here. When I think of systems architecture, I think of dependencies and unintended consequences and things that may or may not happen. So I would think that if you have a little piece of paper that says this is all we're going to accomplish, you have to have a couple inches at the bottom of that paper that, okay, so day 1 happens. Oh, we didn't know that this happened to this specific thing because the dependencies weren't obvious, and some aren't. And so there has to be, is this the 20% rule where, well, let's see what happens on Monday morning because we can't predict everything, especially in these complex systems.
Yeah. And I think there has to be some slack in there for that, of course, too, right? I mean, like you'll build patterns and pattern awareness over time, but you don't want to be running down to the wire on this. This is definitely one where there's a lot we can get ahead of now, prior to the technical solution, or the technical choice, being made. So, yeah.
I'm working with a company in Ohio, and they're trying to establish a way to communicate with different folks in different areas. And boy, we're throwing everything. I mean, we know email's bad, and this is bad, and it's good. So this is an oddball question, but what kind of tools have you used in the past that are successful with communicating to people at different levels of skill set in different areas in the federal government? Is it Slack? Is it email? I mean, is it face-to-face? So what's the magic sauce I can tell these people in Ohio?
It's funny. It's like multimodal, right? And like to your point, right? Like, your web developer may prefer like a bunch of tailored Slack messages. Somebody who's like working in the fire service might need to have a meeting with like a paper handout. I think a lot of that too, like should probably be, it's kind of like almost like a right tool, right place. Like right medium, right message. It's not the right, it's not exactly the metaphor, but like, it's going to be dictated probably by the roles, and like the people who are like tasked with distributing that message are probably going to be the best ones. I think that the thing is the messaging is like just needs to be consistent across format. Um, and like it also, like anything that's an information campaign, it needs to be repetitive. It needs to start early, and you need to keep ramping it on a schedule. And so part of that is creating a communications plan.
Yeah.
And like the different not modality, maybe it's modality, making sure that message can be consistently delivered. And it's almost it's a communications function.
I mean, it's just painfully obvious. You pick up your phone, and right now there are people in ICE who are taking over jobs at TS. They don't have desks. They may have a desk that may be moving somewhere. I mean, what about the FEMA trailers that are, they're by definition going to move? I mean, there's just certain organizations that don't have little John Gilroy with a cup of coffee at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so maybe the communication has to flex with. So John Gilroy, 9 o'clock in the morning, sitting at his desk on 14th Street, give him an email. What about Joe Blow, who is en route? That's true right now, isn't it? And so it's a different perspective than most people think. I mean, it's not. I guess I think of a textbook situation. Well, A and B, and then no. It's so flexible and loose. I mean, I remember years ago I'd interview enterprise architects. One guy brought me a 11 by 14 laminated 14-point type 11-point of every single system in the whole network. It was like, Charles would throw that out the window. I mean, maybe you'd have some ink in there, and maybe some pencil marks, and then some open spaces. But it just seems like that the world today is there's so many different federal components that an edge network is being talked about now, and people are worrying about so many different things than before. So it's just this flexibility, I think, that's in demand that wasn't there 10, 15 years ago.
I think another thing too that we have the option for now is a self-service type thing where, you might have a trained chatbot. And there could be a very general one that's just about core HR. There could be one that's been fine-tuned for agency-specific asks. But that also gives people an opportunity to say, like, hey, I heard about this thing. When I have time, let me just go look at this. And that could be in various levels of sensitivity, right? So, but a lot of that could probably be public and just generally searchable. So there's other ways too that can make it a little bit more interactive, I think, than just like pure comps or like pure one-way comps. Yeah. So, and you can test that too. You can see how effective it was. So that'd be cool.
Just to show you how scientific I am, I have a calendar on the wall, and April 15th is coming up. Kind of a deadline here. You may want to get a hold of your accountant and do something here. But there's deadlines for this transition as well. And so the deadline is 2028. So I haven't read the memo carefully. So what's going to happen is it going to be a 6-month warning? Is it going to be evaluation time? Or what do you think is going to happen with this deadline reaches?
I would think, everything needs to be complete at that point. So the agencies, I don't recall right now if it's like both waves. So there's an initial wave that's on the larger agencies, and then there's a second wave that follows on thereafter. There's a timeline to complete the core, I think I want to say elements, and then there's like a kind of like a work-in period, if I recall correctly. No. I should have reviewed it more recently, but but I think it makes sense. There's going to have to be some transition period, and there's got to be some kind of a slack period where people can learn from mistakes and adapt, because it's just amazing. I mean, just the whole 2 million people. I mean, there's got to be different unique situations all through there. Yeah, it's a aggressive timeline. So, we'll see how it goes. I mean, I think that's one of the best things to get ahead of it. The part that's going to take the most time is the manual tracking down and the surfacing all of that info or data, and then turning it into actionable information. The technical part, that's the great thing about any computer system. It very magically operates on data quickly. Yeah. You get everything else in order that goes into it. The computing takes very little time, but it's all the human work around it.
Yeah, it's herding all the data, and I think that's the skill set that Excella has. I think it has good, capable people that can walk in a situation, and you can call it emotional intelligence or regular intelligence or whatever kind of intelligence, but to sense the situation, you get a feel for what's going on. And I think that's having a track record. It shows that you can go into a complicated situation and fight your way through and fight for your client in order to get this done on time.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, all of these problems and all of these challenges are ultimately things that are in service of like human needs and human missions. And, the technology is an accelerant and a catalyst. It's not just a remedy. So, and
we've gone through these transitions, 10 years ago with the cloud. We went that transition. Yeah. So transitions and people were shocked and said it never happened. And all of a sudden it made its way through and worked through many different situations. I think it's going to happen. It just makes too much sense. I mean, if the goal here is to reduce duplicative spending, this is a perfect way to do it, isn't it?
I think so.
Good. Well, this has been an interesting conversation focusing on data collection and then the end result here in 2028. We're running out of time here, Charles. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Charles Fiery, Director, Market Solutions Architect at Excella.
Thanks very much.